Let's get started with this basic server security for your cPanel server. These are things you're going to do on the SSH for your server. First thing, we're going to set up the firewall. A firewall on your operating system is very important. This is probably the most important security thing for you on your cPanel server. So in this case, I'm going to use nftables, and I'm just going to base my example based off of the nftables configuration wiki example, which is here. So I've already edited a sample file that you can just copy and use. So I've added all the cPanel ports. You can actually separate things. If you wanted to, you can separate this into its own port, like I've done there. So if there is any port that you're sure you will usually disable, you can just put it on its own like that instead of putting them together. So for example, if you wanted to maybe make 2087 its own port, we can just copy that, and I will remove all these others. And then of course, remove it from there. So you can do the same for any ports that you're sure you will be disabling them at some point, and for you to get back into your server, you have to come to SSH and enable them. You can put them on their own, and if you need to enable and if you need to disable the port, you'll just comment out that line. You'll just comment out the port that you want to disable momentarily. That's a quick tip for you there. If you need to disable any port, if you want to disable all the cPanel ports, that is for accessing WHM and cPanel, you can comment that out as well. And when you need to come back to the server, you can uncomment it, save, and restart nftables. And we're going to see how to do that in a moment. Depending on the distro you're using, you will be able to follow along with me. In this case, I'm using Alma Linux. So since I'm using Alma Linux, then if you're on CentOS, you're on Rocky Linux, you're on Cloud Linux, you'll be able to follow along because you can use DNF. So the only part we'll be using DNF, I believe, is there, and there if you need to install nftables. Probably it is already installed. First thing, when you want to use nftables and you only want to use nftables, then just disable all these other firewalls. For example, firewalld, I will disable it, and then iptables as well, and then remove iptables. If you are following along on Ubuntu, you can do apt purge -y, and I hope the package names are the same, but you can Google that. So let me first of all do this. Copy. Okay, I'm not logged into the server. Let me first log in. Copy, Control-Shift-V, or rather Control-A, SSH into this user. So right now we're logging in with the password, but we're going to disable password authentication at some point. Control-Shift-V, Control-L. So let's see. So I logged into this server probably 10 minutes ago, and you can already see that I have 18 failed login attempts. So you can see why it's important to do this basic cPanel server security on your SSH. And once I do all this, you'll see that every time you log in, the number will probably be 0 or maybe just 1 from a failed login from you. But this is important. So let's continue. The first step is to disable all these firewalls and uninstall them. So I've already done this. I've already removed all these firewalls, but let me just run it here. Control-L, Control-Shift-V. All right, so you can see all of these are no match. That means they don't exist. I've removed all of them. There's nothing to do. But in your case, you probably have them. And if you're on Ubuntu as well, remember to remove UFW. So I didn't add UFW there, but also UFW, you need to add it. So just copy the same thing and add UFW, and here as well add UFW and remove it, because we only want to use nftables. Then let's install nftables. If you're on Ubuntu, you can do apt install. Here, let me just do this I'm on Alma Linux 9. So Control Shift V, DNF install. So it's already installed. We don't need to do anything. I'm just going to copy this, enable and restart. Control Shift V. All right, so this means it's already enabled and restarted on my Alma Linux server. So the next thing is to add the configuration files. All right, the next thing is to add this configuration file, and this is going to allow the specific ports that you want to allow. I have the custom SSH port there. You can edit it. I'm just allowing it in advance, and then we're going to add it as our SSH port later on, but it's already there. So once we allow it in SSH and restart SSH, it will already be allowed in your firewall. And then it allows all these other ports. If there's any port you want to add, you can always come in there, comma, and then add whichever port you want to add, right? So I'm just going to delete that. And I've also shown you if you want to separate any port to its own line so that you can enable it and disable it at your own will, then you can do so by just putting it in its own line, like I did for 2087. So let's come back here, and we've enabled nftables. Here in enabling nftables, you might probably experience an error, and this is something I've experienced in other servers, and the error will probably be that xtables is not supported or something like that. And that is usually because you don't have a configuration file for nftables. So let's come here and let's see how to figure out if you're going to add your nftables here. So you can add your nftables to this, but it's always a good idea to use the default configuration file that is loaded by CMD. And in most distros, almost every distro I've come across, usually they load the default in this file, etc nftables.conf. And if this is a case for you, you can simply open that file and then paste all of this in there. But how do you figure out which is the default file that is being loaded on your Linux distro? You can do so by coming to, before I do that, I want to show you, I have added some aliases here that will save me time. So instead of typing sudo systemctl disable enable systemctl status, I'm just going to type sys, and that's going to save me time. With that in mind, systemctl status nftables will usually tell you which is the default configuration file for nftables. So if you go here, and in my case, you can see by default, this is what is being loaded. Okay, the service file is that. So how can we use this service file to figure out which is the default configuration file where we can add our rules? Just copy that, and I can do cut. I want to read the content of that loaded CMD file. Control Shift C, Control Shift V to paste, to copy and paste. And then we can come down here, and you can see here under exec start, right? NFT is going to start a specific file here. So the file that NFT is starting is this. By all standards, this is a default configuration file, but what I need to do is to go into this file and confirm if that is the case. So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to cut that file. I want to see the content. Control Shift C, Control Shift V, enter. So it starts here. So what you can see here is that this is a file that is commented out. Like literally, it has nothing inside of it. If you read the contents of the file, it's going to tell you uncomment the include statement here to load the default config sample. All right. So the default config sample you can see is that default config sample is this file. So this means that I will edit this file and then uncomment this, and I will add my rules there. Or you can even come in and paste all your rules in this file. But probably you don't want to do that. And you should just do it the way that I'm doing it. On Alma Linux, you uncomment this, and then you add your configuration files in that file. All right. So if you're on a different distro, if if you come here under exec start, you're probably going to see etc nftables.conf. This one here. In other distros, this is a file that will be loaded on the systemd file, service file. So if this is a file that has been loaded here and here as well, then just do vi etc config and then paste your content, and then paste all these configuration files inside of that file, right? But in this case, this is not the situation. What I can do is edit this. So I'll do Control L to clear the screen, Control A to go to the beginning of the line, and then I will do vi. I'm using Vim to edit, and uncomment this line. I'll just delete the pound sign at the beginning to uncomment it, and then I will go into this file and add these configuration files. So let's do escape and then Shift ZZ to save that file. And we need to go to that file. I will just do vi. I want to edit that file. Control Shift C, Control Shift V to edit that main NFT file. So you can see here, this is the default file that you can enable, and it has some things that are allowed here, but we don't care for all this. So what we're going to do is, in fact, even before editing it, at least let me save it. Control Shift ZQ, Shift ZQ to get out of that, and I want to back it up. Control Shift C, Control Shift V to paste dot back, Control A to go to the beginning of the line, and I'm just going to CP to copy it. So at least I have a backup of it in case of any reason why I would need the default. I can go back to the default file. So for now, I'm just going to edit that, and I can type 1000 dd to delete everything in that line. That's like delete the next 1000 lines, just so it can delete everything in that file. So I'm going to copy all of that, the sample NFT, and Control Shift V. I will paste all of it here. If you need to edit anything, you can always come in here and edit. And this is just based on the sample, which is here on the nftables wiki. So we've allowed all the ports for WHM and cPanel. So here, I don't see UDP. Let me see. UDP. Okay, this one. This should be UDP. I press I to go into edit mode, UDP. That is for DNS. If you're using your server for DNS, you need to allow UDP. So I've rebooted the server. So after rebooting the server, you can just log back in. All right. Now that I can log in, it means that I didn't get locked out by my firewall. NFT list rule set. There you go. Your firewall is working, and now you can continue to do other things. So now that the firewall is working, let's continue with the other things. And what we're going to do next is set up a new user, and then we'll generate an SSH key on the computer, add it to the server, test if the new user can log in with that private key. We're going to disable password authentication, root login, and we're going to change the port. So the port that you're using here, make sure it is the same port that you've allowed here. Okay, so I've added it there for you. You can just change it to whichever port you want to use for SSH. And then finally, we're going to install CrowdSec. So instead of using fail to ban, I'd rather CrowdSec. So I'm just going to come here and we can search for CrowdSec, a free, helpful, important, necessary tool for security. So you can read more about CrowdSec on the CrowdSec website. It blocks IPs that try to scan your server, try to scan if there are any loopholes with previous CVEs, that is insecurity loopholes, maybe for Apache, Nginx, WordPress, lots and lots of different software, even PHP. Attackers might try to scan your server and see if there are loopholes like that, and CrowdSec will block them. So that's the last thing we'll do. So let's start with the first one, create a new user. So here, just add a user, give the user a name, and then set a password for the user, and then you add the user to the wheel group so that they can use sudo. Just remember, I'm on Alma Linux, so that's why we're adding it to the wheel group. If you're on Ubuntu, you're going to need to add it to the sudo group. I'll just copy the first two. So change the username to what you prefer. Control L, Control Shift V. Enter a password for the user. I'll copy that. Control Shift V. Control Shift V. All right. So our new user has been created. Now let's add it to the wheel group so that they can have the sudo privileges needed to administer the server. Copy, Control Shift V, enter. So the moment of truth, we need to first of all test if we can log into the server with that user and run sudo. So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to copy the username from there. You can open a new terminal window to confirm that you can log in. Control Shift T to open a new terminal window. Control Shift V to paste. Control A to go to the beginning of the line, SSH. Control Shift V. All right, so we're logged in. Let's confirm if we can do sudo dnf update. Enter the sudo password, the password for the user. Control Shift V. There we go. There's nothing to do. You can try to install something. Let me do sudo dnf install tmax. You can use sudo without any problem. So from now on, you can actually continue using the new user with sudo instead of using the root user. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue using the new user, and I can just close the root user and continue with my new user since they already have the sudo privileges needed to administer the server and do everything else that I need to do on this list. So we've set up the user. That is done. The next step, let's generate an SSH key. This you have to do on your local computer. Control Shift T and do that on your local computer, not on the server. So we're going to make a directory in the SSH directory, and you can call it whatever you want. We want to store our keys in that directory. Give it a name that at least you can recall, or you can figure out which server it is for. On my local computer. All right. And then I will generate a key, and the key I'm going to generate is ed25519 key, and the file name for the key will be that. So it will be stored in the folder that I've just created, and the key will be called that. The public and the private key will be called that. So I'm just going to copy that to generate the key. Control Shift V to paste it. And if you want to add a passphrase, you can add a passphrase. In this example, I'm going to add a passphrase because it is also another important security feature for your key if you're going to use it to log in. So I'm just going to add a passphrase for my key. Confirm the passphrase So every time you use the key, you have to enter the passphrase. All right, there we go. Our keys have been generated. There are the two keys, the public key and the private key. So the public key is the one that we're going to add onto the server for this user. So when you're adding it, add it for the user that you just created. So copy the key to the server and make sure you're adding the .pub key. Okay, .pub, that is a public key that you need to add to the server. So we are still doing this offline. We are not on the server. Control-Shift-C. Let me get the password for this user because I'm going to need it in a moment. Copy, enter the password for that user. There you go. The SSH key, the private key, the public key has now been added for the new user that you set up. So let's try to log in. Let's log in. So to log in, you'll just do SSH, the user, and the IP, and then the identity of the key, and then the location for the private key. When you're logging in, make sure you're logging in with the private key. So copy and Control-Shift-V, enter. Remember, I set up a passphrase for my key. So every time I need to log in, I will enter the passphrase for the key. Make sure it's something that you can remember, because if you forget it, you will lose access to your server. You lose access to your server. So I will enter mine. There we go. We're logged in. If you don't want to enter the passphrase, you can generate your key without a passphrase. Now that we've ascertained that we can log in with our SSH key, I'm going to disable password authentication, the root user from logging in, and change the SSH port. So I can do that simply by creating my own SSH configuration file. This is actually my preferred way, and I think it should be the recommended way for editing your SSH configuration. Put your configurations in your own file in the SSH config-d. If you go into this directory, you'll see that Cloud Init and even cPanel has added some of their configurations in there. So let's come in here. Let's do an ls of that directory, Control-Shift-V. Okay, permission denied. So I need my password for sudo. Copy. Control-Shift-V. All right. So when you do that, let me do it in a cleaner way. ls-lh ls-lh. All right, so you'll see inside of that directory, cPanel has their configuration file, Cloud Init, Red Hat as their configuration file. So we're going to see what's inside of each of those. So actually inside here, I forgot, here you need to add .conf. It should be .conf. So let's just do Control-Z, and then I'm going to select that, Control-D to edit them all at once, and I'll do .conf. It's a good thing I opened all this because you can see they all have .conf. So create your own configuration file. Let's look at the content of each of this. The first one is the cPanel one. So we're just going to cut, Control-Delete, 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 and I want to cut, and then Control-E to go to the end of the line on my terminal here, and then I want to see the contents of And most importantly, make sure you have sudo. We are no longer the root, so let's use sudo. Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-V, enter, and you can see this is what is inside of that file. Let's go to the next one. It's not auto-completing. Let me just copy it. Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-V. So here, okay, this is one that I will need to remove because you can see the password authentication has been set to yes, and we need to set this one to no. So let me just delete that right away. We don't need it. It's not going to harm anything. RM. Just remove it. Cannot remove. I need sudo. I keep forgetting. I need sudo. I am no longer the root user. Let's look at the last one and see if it's going to affect our configuration file in any way. 50 Red Hat. Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-V, enter. Oh, we are not removing, we are doing cut. Okay, we're doing cut. Control-Shift-V. Okay, this is not going to affect our configuration. So Control-L to clear the screen. We can continue. We're going to create our configuration file, and then actually I don't need this. We're going to create our configuration file, and then this is going to get added to that file. Okay, it's going to get added in a new line. Password authentication is going to be set to no, and then in a new line, permit root login is going to get set to no, and all of that will be appended to the file that we've just created. And then eventually we're going to change the permissions for that file so that it is owned by the root user only. So I can copy all of this in one go. Copy, Control-Shift-V, enter. All right, so let's look at the file and confirm that it was actually created and our configuration files are in there. So I'm going to use Vim to open it. Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-V. Permission denied, Shift-ZQ. I keep forgetting. Sudo must be there. All right, so you can see there is a file and there is some space at the top. Let me see why there is a space here. So I can just press DD to delete the space at the top. But most importantly, password authentication has been set to no. Permit root login has been set to no. And our new port is that. So if you're going to change your port, make sure you change your port here. And you also change it in the nftables configuration. So Shift-ZZ to close that. The reason why we have the first line is because of this. Is because of the new line at the beginning. So I can actually remove that so that it can start at the very top of the line for you. Control-S. We can actually delete it and test it to make sure. I want to give you something that is working. Sudo RM to remove it. That's the configuration file that I've just created. And we can create it again. Copy everything. Control-Shift-V, enter, and let's look at it. All right, now it's created without the line at the top, without the empty line at the top. So Shift-ZQ, get out of that, Control-L, and then now let's restart SSH. You can restart SSH with sudo systemctl restart sshd, but I can just use sit sshd. All right. Okay, so I can't use it here because I have not added the aliases here. So you can copy the alias from the other side and add them to bash, but that is not important to this tutorial for now. So let me just restart it with this. Copy, Control Shift V, enter, and now Control Shift T, open a new terminal to make sure that the changes we've made are successful. So I'm going to copy that. First of all, let's confirm if we can log in. If we can log in with a password. So SSH, Control Shift V. All right, so you can see connection refused. So this is going to test the port, and you can see connection was refused on port 22. Let's log in with the new port, SSH dash P. Was it 6022? All right, so you can see now we are getting a different error, and now permission denied. You need a public key. You can't log in with a password. All right, so we've confirmed two things. You cannot log in with port 22, and you cannot log in with a password. If every time you see that, just know that you need to enter a public key to log in. So let's log in with our public key and our new port. Did I add that here for you? Let me see. Disable, restart. Let me add there how to log in. How to log in with SSH key and port. At the very top, I believe I logged in with the key. SSH, I logged in with the key. There we go. Copy. Control V. So SSH, the user, the IP, identity of the key, and most importantly, add the port. So the port is 6022. So I'm just going to copy that. Come this side, Control Shift V, enter, and enter the passphrase if you added a passphrase to your key. There you go. Now you're logged in. You can try sudo dnf install CrowdSec, get the password for the user to use sudo, copy, Control Shift V, Y. There you go. Now your server is much more protected. And let's just see something here. Last time when I logged in, I received a couple of failed logins. Now you can see there aren't any, and you can come back even after 24 hours. You'll see that there are no failed logins. So these are things that you shouldn't take for granted. They're very, very important for security, especially when you're fighting bots. And nowadays, bots are the bigger threat. Bots are the bigger threat because they're used to scan for any loopholes in your server, in your website. So if you can block them, well and good. So that pretty much covers this part. Let's go to CrowdSec and let's install CrowdSec. So first of all, add the CrowdSec repository and then install CrowdSec. And then since I installed nftables, we're going to install the nftables bouncer. So the bouncer is what is responsible for blocking IPs. So let's just copy and come back, Control Shift V, enter. Yes. 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 let me add all these yeses here. DNF install dnf-y -y. Yes. The firewall bouncer and CrowdSec have been installed. So what next? Let's see if CrowdSec automatically enabled something for us. Okay, this is good. You can see it detected that we have Apache, we have Dovecot, MariaDB, MySQL, and all this running on our server. So this means that it has automatically added all the collections that are needed to protect those services. So if you enable any service, you can, if you do enable something else, because I have seen that I haven't enabled Nginx. Nginx is not there. In case I enable and install Nginx, you can do CS, CLI. In fact, let me just go and do that. Let me go to my cPanel here. Nginx. Let's go to Nginx Manager. Install. So Nginx has been installed. Once I've enabled Nginx Manager and enabled the cache for Nginx, I believe now Nginx will be recognized on the server. So if I was to do CrowdSec CLI setup, oh man, sudo again, sudo, enter the password, copy, Ctrl+Shift+V. So detect and configure services, press enter. And now you can see it is detecting Nginx as well. So just press enter. Do you want to continue? It's adding the collection for Nginx. Yes, continue. Just press enter. Yes, press enter. And we can reload. CrowdSec. Ctrl+Shift+C, Ctrl+Shift+V. All right. So now, if you have set up rate limiting on Nginx, IPs will be blocked if they exceed that. If they also try to pass your Nginx logs, trying to figure out if there are any insecurities, they will also be blocked. It used to be that instead of doing CLI setup, you could just enter this. I don't know that it's still available. Okay, it seems like it's no longer available. So let me just remove it there. Just remove it from there. Ctrl+S. So if you need to set up, you can just do CS, CLI, that is for CrowdSec CLI setup. If you enable any new services, just do it like this. Let's just confirm if our bouncer is being recognized. So CS, CLI, bouncers list. Oh man, sudo. All right, so our bouncer is there, well and good. So tomorrow, just give it like 24 hours. CS, CLI, come back and check if there are any IPs that have been blocked. Decisions list. Sudo. Okay, right now there are no active decisions. There are no active decisions, but come back tomorrow, you'll probably see that there are certain IPs that have been banned. have been blocked. So if you find that an IP that you're using, sometimes it will even block your own IP. If you find that is the case, look at CSCLI decisions list, and then decisions, you can do -h to see what you can do. You can delete. So Control L. So decisions delete, and you can do -h again to see how you can delete. You can delete an IP. Where is that? You can delete all. If you do -all, it will delete all current decisions. If you do -i, it will delete a source IP. So maybe you want to delete your own IP or a specific IP for a client. They're not able to access their own server. You can do so. Let me just do Control L to clear the screen. Sudo CSCLI decisions list delete -i, and you can delete the IP. Right. So that should pretty much cover this. And if you want to back up the server, you're using WHM. So this is already built into your WHM. So let's go to backup. Is it here under backup configuration? Here you can see you can enable backups. The type of backups that you want to enable, make sure you compress the backups. Check available disk space. If the disk space is maybe less than 10%, don't bother with the backup. Don't bother with the backup if your disk space is 90% filled. Maximum destination backup timeout. You can increase this. It doesn't really have to be that. Maybe you have a big server. Maximum backup restoration timeout. And you can choose if you want to do the daily backups. You can choose when you want to do the backups. Daily backups. Select specific days for the backup. Retention, how many backups do you want to retain? Maybe you want 15 backups. If you have enough space, you can have even up to 30. 30 will be retained. And once they reach 15, the last one will be deleted and a new one will be added. You can do weekly backup. That is, if you want to do weekly backup, do weekly. You can do monthly backups as well. It depends on what you need. You know your system, you know how well you want to back up your server. And then most importantly, if you want to back up remotely, you can select the destination. If you want to back up to Hetzner storage box, you can use SFTP or WebDAV. So I don't have a storage box with me right now, but the easiest one to set up is the SFTP. So SFTP, once you create the destination for SFTP, enter the name, maybe Hetzner storage box, and then you can select to transfer systems as well. Don't select that. And then the backup directory. Once you log into your Hetzner storage box, you can create a directory and then you add that directory here, or if you don't, it's going to use the root directory. And then the remote host, this is the Hetzner URL. You will usually get the link to your Hetzner storage box, and then the port, and then the remote account username. Hetzner will usually send you that, something starting with U. So you can just search for SFTP storage box. Access with SFTP. You can use this to access your storage box for SFTP. So use port 22. That is for SFTP. Make sure you explicitly add port 22 if you want to access your Hetzner storage box. So come and use the port. I wanted to confirm the port. Use port 22. And then the user, that's the username that you'll get from Hetzner. And then you'll use password authentication. That is a password for your user on Hetzner. And you can leave that at default and then just save. So that's pretty much how to set up the remote backup for Hetzner. You can use all these others, even Backblaze. So that should pretty much end this. If you have any more questions, feel free to let me know. I'm going to include this for you and this as well. That's it for this one. If you have a question, just let me know, reach out and I'll see what I can do.